Let's see, let's pray and we'll get going. Jill, would you pray for us?
Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you, Father, for this evening. I thank you for this time that we can get together, Lord, to learn your word, to worship you, to love you, Father. Thank you so much for what you've done for us and for sending your Son down for our sins. Please open our hearts and our minds as we study your word tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay, last week, I told you I'm going to have to decide what I want to do this week, and I've made a decision. And what we're doing, we're now jumping into the Bible. We're going to look at it. We talked again about doctrine, what that's based on, our non-negotiables. We talked about just an example of how do we know talked about God, the doctrine of God. It took several weeks to go through that. We talked about the Bible itself, how it's put together. Last week, I think that might have been an eye-opener, it sounded like, for a lot of people. And if you missed last week, you might want to watch the recording of it.
I couldn't find it.
The video.
Yeah.
You couldn't find it?
Tony could direct you to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that helped you understand, I hope, in a new way, and in a simple way, the Bible that we look to, we read, and I said we're going to probably jump over the first two eras, because there's 9 eras. Do you remember this? We talked about 9 eras in the Bible. The Old Testament is divided up by. And the first era is the creation era. And we already covered that on Sunday morning, some months ago, looking at the first 6 chapters of Genesis. And then we're looking at the next era called the Patriarch era. And we're on that now, and we're a couple of weeks really from getting into the story of Joseph, the final. He's not considered a patriarch, but I'd call him the 4th patriarch, because there's actually more dedicated to Joseph than the other patriarchs. There's so much dedicated to his story. It's just phenomenal. And it's going to take us. He's going to take us. His story takes us through to the end of Genesis. And then we turn the page, and we then get to the Exodus era, the 3rd era. And we're going to jump into that. The Exodus era is covered in the remainder of the 5 books in the Torah. The Torah is also called what? We talked about it last week. The Tanakh. Remember that was an acronym?
TNK.
For those who are here? Okay. So one book covers 2 eras. 4 more books is going to cover the 3rd era, Exodus. And here it is. And so it's Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And that is where we find the Exodus era. Because it's while they're in the wilderness. It's their experience there. That whole leaving and wandering, we get all the information in the following 4 books. So here we are. The Exodus era is the departure, which was, there we are, that mass movement of the Israelites out of slavery. Oh, did I do something wrong? Wait. There I go. Okay, so these final 4 books, it's the record of this departure, the mass movement of the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, where they were aliens for about 400 years, just as God told Abraham, if you remember back in Genesis 15. Do you remember that? Back in the patriarch era, God told Genesis, your offspring are going to be slaves for 400 years. He's very specific. Now, I want to ask you a question here. Let's stop here just for a moment. If God told you, listen, you're going to have a whole bunch of kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, great-great-great, and they're going to be slaves in another country for 400 years, how would that news hit you?
Hard.
Must be a mistake. Would you even want to have kids? Hey, God, cancel my request for a son. I want you to notice, God told him that, and it didn't change Abraham's mind. Think about that. He says, I still want a son. Even though you know what that's going to lead to. Yeah, because God isn't just going to allow that to take place. He's then going to come in on the backside of that experience and show himself off in a way that's been unprecedented still in the history of the world. The Exodus, the delivery of God's people out of Egypt, what compares to that? Cross of Christ. That's the only thing that overpowers that story. But as far as just a miraculous, amazing deliverance, which we're going to look at tonight, that comes. So, and what I'm going to do, this is my manuscript, but if you don't mind, I'm just going to read it as we go through it, and I'm going to share some things. If you got questions in between this and my rabbit trails, please ask. If you got comments, insights, share them. Good? Okay, so God used Israel's experiences in Egypt to prepare them for the special task that God gave them to accomplish on the earth. And they were, number one, to bear witness to the living God, that there is a God. Okay? There's only one God. Writing the Holy Scriptures. Bringing the Savior into the world. And the dominant lesson throughout the Exodus era is that deliverance is essential, isn't it? And it points to the overarching truth that humankind is in the bondage of sin, and that needs intervention of God to set humankind free. So Exodus is filled with what we might call types of Christ that were to prepare the Israelites to understand their need for a Savior who has to come in physical form and pay for their sins while providing safety from death by His blood. Right? And again, I assume everybody in the room already has a rough understanding of the Exodus era, so I don't need to camp out too much on any of these points. But you're just going to understand how they fit within the story. So there's four major events in the Exodus era. Right? Number one is clearly the deliverance. This is the actual Exodus they're getting out of there. And that takes place in chapters 1 through 18. And what we're going to look at tonight are the first 12 chapters of Exodus. We're going to try to, we'll see how much we can get through, but I think we can. And what that is the terrible and long suffering of the Jewish people, how it begins, and to consider there's no race in the history of the earth that suffered like the Jews. And to this day, when you think of all the suffering, all the years that they've been in existence, no people group has suffered like the Jews. Second is the law. That appears, it starts in Exodus 19, Exodus chapter 20, by the way, is where the Ten Commandments are delivered, and then it takes you all the way through Numbers chapter 12. So from the Red Sea, it's actually the Reed Sea. But we call it the Red Sea. They travel to Arabia, because actually that's where Mount Sinai is. It's not where you think it is. Mount Sinai on the map is not the Mount Sinai where they camped out. Paul even writes about that in a letter. We'll talk about that a little later.
Joel was just at Mount Sinai. Did that video.
The real Mount Sinai?
In Arabia.
Oh yeah. Was he able to get in the gate?
He was.
Really?
Yeah,
Did he sneak in?
Yeah, he's got a whole thing about it.
Oh, you're kidding.
So you have to.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, because Muslims own that area. And they own that mountain called Jabal Allah. Jabal Allah's. It's the mountain of God. That's what they call it. It's pretty much Allah's mountain. And there's a big chain link fence around it, and there's armed guards. They don't want anybody in there, but it's amazing. Something we'll talk about a little later when we get there. So they camp there at Mount Sinai. They receive God's commandments there at Mount Sinai. Moses meets with God alone. Gives Moses stone tablets and the full revelation of the law, which is to govern Israel's national life as well as their relationship to God, which all shows up in Leviticus. And God promises to bless Israel abundantly for obedience and curse her terribly for disobedience. Right? Then there's Kadesh Barnea. This shows up in Numbers 13 through 20. This is they have left Mount Sinai. They head toward a place called Kadesh. That's it's not Kadesh, Kadesh Barnea. It's an oasis. And it's the southern gateway into the promised land. 12 spies, this is where the 12 spies are sent in. Joshua sends them in. They return with good news and bad news. Right? The land is just as God said it was. That's the good news. But the Canaanites are giants. That's the bad news to them. And God said, you can take it. But 10 of the 12 spies said, no, we can't. And the people believe the majority report, which is almost always wrong when it comes to God-sized assignments. Would you agree?
Agreed.
All right. And fourth, there is then the 40 years of wandering. That's Numbers 20 through all of Deuteronomy. This is everybody who was 21 years old and up at the time of that first approach to the promised land. Did I say Joshua? When Moses sent the spies in, and they, the guys come back, we're scared to death, can't take these people. Those folks, they died during the 40 years of wandering. Think about that. So everybody who was 21 years old, or older at the time, when they first come up to the promised land, called the entry point to the promised land, and they refuse to go in. And they're sent back out into the wilderness for 40 years and just travel, be nomadic. They die. They never get to see the promised land. A new generation comes to leadership after the 40 years, which is willing to follow their leaders into the land. Pretty much they're going, okay, again, everybody 21 years and older is dead, so 21 years and younger. They grew up, got married, had kids. They're going, we don't want to raise our family in the wilderness. Don't want to raise our family in a democratic nation. Democrat-led nation, I mean. Sorry. Hey, that's how it is. By the way, Christy Noem, new governor. Good news, right? Sorry we lost the House. That's a disappointment. But
Seats in the Senate.
we got
rid of some rhinos in the Senate.
We did. I mean, we got some good stuff. I didn't see all the governor races. It looks like gained some, lost some. Don't know how close y'all have been following that, but
But look how important some of the losses were too.
yeah. This is gonna be interesting.
I love how you didn't even hesitate to just dive straight into that rabbit trail.
Hey,
You need carrots.
But having more in the Senate will be good for future judges.
isn't it right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is when you think about it, if you're gonna lose one or gain one, you want the Senate. You want a majority of the Senate because chances are Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I don't know. I don't know how long she'll last. Will Donald Trump be re-elected too? I mean, the Electoral College was quite beneficial in the election of Trump, and things might change with that 2 years from now with the House having changed. Boy, we want to keep Donald Trump or Mike Pence in that White House. Marcia.
Christie will probably appoint, however that all works, but appoint 2 Supreme Court justices for South Dakota.
In the state.
Well, 1 for sure.
Yes.
Maybe 2.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be fantastic. She's going to do such a great job. She is so right. So Moses leads them to the north of the Dead Sea near Jericho. You all know that Joshua wrote the Battle of Jericho.
Been there.
And you've been to Jericho. So they get up to that point. That's the eastern gateway to the Promised Land. And Moses, he encourages the people one last time. And he's getting old. And he says, come on, folks, you can do this. He's 120 years old. And he gives some additional instructions. That's Deuteronomy. I mean, think about this. That's how it opens. Okay, when you get in there, when you finally get in there, because you're going to do it this time, I know it, and you've built your houses and your gold and silver has multiplied and your flocks have multiplied, don't say, I by my own work and strength and whatever have made myself rich. He says, it is I, the Lord, that gives you the ability to become prosperous. It's I've done this for you, so don't get a big head over it. So then he names Joshua as his successor, and he dies. So here's a chapter and time breakdown of the Exodus. And again, if you're on that email list from Tony, he's got all this here, and he will email it to you. But here's how it goes. Chapter 1 covers about 350 years from the entrance into Egypt to the birth of Moses. Because when we get to chapter 1 of Exodus, Joseph's family is already there. And they're starting to breed like rabbits. And then, well, I'm going to get to it in just a second. Here's how it goes. The birth of Moses is about 1527 BC. Just think about that, okay? So, a little over 1,500 years before Jesus, that's when Moses is born. And it opens with a note regarding the entrance of the family of Jacob into Egypt, which was about 1877 BC. And after the death of Joseph, which was about 1807 BC, the children of Israel prospered. That's verse 7 of chapter 1. And they prospered for about 150 years. And this is where I'm saying, you got your Bible? Open up to Exodus, please. So, as we go through these eras, we're giving ourselves a framework by which to understand each era, right? They're big bite-sized pieces, but nonetheless are bite-sized pieces to better understand your Bible and the whole biblical story. So, here we are. Y'all there? Exodus chapter 1. Take a look at it. Okay, what do you see? Right there, what does verse 1 say?
These are the names of the son of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Remember that? Remember I told you the names is the Hebrew name of Exodus, because these are the names of the sons of Israel, because that's how it starts. Verse 7, what's it say?
The children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly.
There they are. Okay, they multiplied like rabbits.
So which translation is multiplied by rabbits?
That is the Hebrew, the original tongue. So they multiplied like rabbits for about 150 years. In about 1730 BC, a new pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. Look at verse 8. What's it say?
Now king arose who did not know Joseph.
Okay, now there's bad news right there. That's the bad news. A new pharaoh comes into power. Doesn't know Joseph. Didn't know his story. He just knows there's all these Jews around. He goes, these guys are like flies. They're all over the place. There's so many of them. This is a problem for us. And that's when the hostility towards the Israelites begin. All right. So what's verse 9 and 10 say?
They're too many and too mighty for us.
Then what?
They put people over and that dealt with them shrewdly. Basically put them in slavery.
So put people over them to deal with them shrewdly. We're going to start to enslave them. There's too many of them. They're too mighty for us. Isn't that what it says?
Yeah.
Don't miss that.
They outnumber us in both people and in strength.
Listen, if you don't take advantage of your advantage when you've got it, you can lose it. And I'm not going to go too far on this, but I want you to just think about where the election could have gone. What if Hillary would have won? Who knows what's coming next? In our country, anything is possible. The day may come when a king comes into the White House who doesn't really care about Christians, doesn't really know, doesn't know our biblical history, Christian heritage, doesn't care to know, and looks at Christians and says, they're the problem.
Could happen?
Right.
Oh, they said that on the news last night.
What did they say last night on the news?
Oh, they interviewed this gal, and she said the Republicans are not inclusive. They're white, male, Christian, and rural, and they're she was saying we're the problem because we just don't include people, where they include everybody, whatever your gender is, whatever, they'll just include everybody. So she was saying,
Except us.
They were the good
Yeah.
guys,
Mhm.
we're the bad guys.
Yeah, get ready for that. We are the bad guys.
Who's
Especially
defining
white
the
women, we
terms?
voted for Trump.
Right, yeah, the white women. Shame on you.
New York City has covers on some garbage cans with a red circle and a line through it with like a woman holding a Bible that has a red mega hat on. And then another one is a male, like a redneck kind of thing.
With the line.
White Christians.
Says no trash.
Did you hear that?
Says no trash in NYC.
Yeah, no trash in NYC.
Wow, so we're trash in New York.
Yeah.
So, here's the thing, this is the biblical story that turned out the way that, needed to be, as the way it needed to be. And God makes this great deliverance 400 years later. But, there are times where, if you've got the upper hand, you need to use it. See, the Israelites had the upper hand in Egypt at one point, but were they a threat? No, because watch, it's not their nature to be a threat. Now, let me just shoot straight with you. The conservative Christian Republican, it's not our nature to be a threat to the Democrats. Even though, we're not the ones who say, yeah, kill babies, we're not the ones that say, abortion is great and marry whatever you want and go to bed with men and women at the same time and be bisexual and who cares what gender you think you are. It really doesn't matter. There was really no design in that because there's no God. So there's no reason for anything. Either way.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so that's why their leadership says, pick fights with us, bully us, you just look at what's going on. And the bulliers call us the bullies. Those who are bringing in what we do not value are saying we're the ones bringing in stuff of no value and we're trash.
Well, if we do stand up, we're supposed to turn the other cheek. We're not supposed to be aggressive.
Yeah, right.
That's what we're
Okay.
with you.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, so again, how often does the church in America totally misunderstand Jesus' words, turn the other cheek? He's just saying have a long fuse. He didn't say let them, kill you, enslave you. He didn't say that. Nonetheless, if oh boy, rabbit trail.
Let it
So
Let it go. Let it go.
If the church, again, I've taught on this before, but if you really know your early American history, most people went to church, and so we could say most church goers, and it was the majority of the militia were church men. They were men of the church that all went out to battle and pushed back on the British while they could.
During service.
Yeah. I mean, the preachers, as you know, John Peter Muhlenberg, most famous Lutheran pastor at that time, he's the guy that goes, okay, preaches out of Ecclesiastes. There's a time for peace, there's a time for war, men, meet me in the back of the church, grab your long guns, let's go. And he ends up being he's an officer in the military. And that's how it was. Now, that's a very pivotal verse that you just read, because Pharaoh recognizes the godless king recognizes they're more powerful than us. They might be a threat to us someday. Let's do something about it now in case. They never were a threat. They were never going to be a threat. They helped build Egypt together. They were a blessing to Egypt. I mean, does he not know his Egyptian history? I mean, how many people don't know their American history? I mean, if that Pharaoh knew his Egyptian history, he would have known, oh, these guys are great. Oh, Joseph. See, he didn't know Joseph. It says he didn't know Joseph. You don't know Joseph? I mean, how many people do you know George Washington? Who? George Washington? Do you not know, John Peter Muhlenberg? So if you don't know Joseph, it's amazing what you can start to suspect and then believe, and then all of a sudden it's war and slavery. So I just throw that in there, given we had an election last night, that I sure hope the conservatives don't roll over and just take all this stuff sitting down. I'm sorry, but you got to show some teeth sometime. You got to show some teeth. You got to push back. Otherwise, we will be just rolled over. You can't, while we have the strength, while we have, I mean, we're perceived as a threat only because of who we are, what we stand for, and things that we do and what we own. And it's not in our nature to use it or go postal, but that's their nature. And they'll go postal on us. In a heartbeat.
Are you talking about 1938 Germany?
Yeah. Think about that.
Brown shirts.
Think about that, the brown shirts. Yeah. Alright, so enough on that. Y'all got where I'm going? Is that weirding anybody out?
God's still on the throne.
That's why we come
Oh,
to our church.
yeah, amen. Thank you, Tim. Okay. So, the period of persecution, it lasts approximately 280 years. So, when we say it was, 400 years in Egypt, that's total in Egypt. In slavery, harsh slavery, no. It was more like 280 years. They were aliens for approximately 430 years. Meaning, they left Canaan, that place that's supposed to be that long-term location that they go in and out of, in and out of, in and out of. It's just so strange. The number of times there was a famine and Abraham goes to the area, I don't want to go there. Never mind. Chapters 2 through 6 cover about 80 years from the birth of Moses to the plagues. Okay, chapters 7 to 12, and you flip through your Bibles. Just take a peek at it as I'm telling you this. Just kind of see those chapters. 2 to 6 cover about 80 years from the birth of Moses to the beginning of the plagues. The plagues in chapter 7 through 12, they occupy about a year, just so you know. So, I don't know how long you thought they'd take. Did you think, oh, that all happened within a month? Those 10 plagues happened over about the span of a year. Chapters 13 to 18 cover about 45 days of travel from Egypt to Mount Sinai. Chapters 19 to 34, Moses is on the mountain for 80 days. About 7 months are required for Israel to construct the tabernacle in chapters 35 to 40. And we're going to take a little closer look at them. And what we would say about the deliverance event, the whole Exodus itself, there are some features to it I want to point out. Chapter 1, look at it again, chapter 1, verse 12. Just think about this. The Israelites multiplied under oppression. Because what does it say in verse 12 of chapter 1?
The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and work them ruthlessly.
Isn't that interesting? Okay? So the more they're oppressed, and Pharaoh puts the hammer on them.
Survival.
Survival. It is. It's very interesting. What happens when the church is oppressed? The church is persecuted. The church, ironically, historically, it grows. How does that happen?
We rely on God when we figure out we can't do it ourselves.
You search for an answer and find it.
When persecution comes, and it will, just because I believe Matthew 24, it's going to come to every nation before the return of Jesus. And that pressure comes, the real believers will be, you're going to float to the surface. Cream's going to float to the top. We're going to find out who the real believers are. And what you're going to do, those who they're willing to die for the cause of Christ. Once you're willing to die for Christ because you believe it so much, and the persecution just solidifies, if anything, your understanding this is the truth. And hopefully you go, I better reach some people because, I mean, they've got to change. Hell's really coming. My concern is not going to be, can't be for my life and how long I can live on earth, but for them, even my persecutors and anybody else who does not know Jesus yet, so that they, once they die, don't live forever without Christ. And so the church just becomes ramped up, it becomes on fire, and it becomes serious. It becomes active, and it starts to share. There are people, unbelievers, that are watching the persecution that will sympathize. There's some softening of hearts that people will have when Christians are persecuted. They might even be what you might call easy fruit. Low-hanging fruit. So, chapter 8 of Acts says, persecution was coming on the church, but it was growing because of it. Chapter 2, look at chapter 2, verses 1 to 10. This is the baby Moses. He shows up on the scene. He's what we might call a type of Jesus. He is born for a purpose. Moses is born to deliver God's people out of Egypt. His mother, if you know the story, surrenders him as Abraham did Isaac in Genesis 22. She gives the baby to God. She goes, God, he's all yours. And she gets him back, plus she gets paid to be who she was. So let me explain this. This is what I think is so neat. Pharaoh at one point goes, hey, tell all the midwives, kill all the babies, the baby boys when you see them born, as you're delivering, and they don't do it. And the midwives say that they report to Pharaoh, the Hebrew women are, they're strong. They're by the time we get there, they've already had the babies. It's amazing. It's just funny. So,
and then God blesses the midwives.
Yeah, he does.
He allows them to have children.
Yes, he blesses them. And what's interesting is that, Moses' mom goes, I got to hide my son, right? And so she makes a basket, paints it with pitch tar so it's waterproof, makes a little floating thing, and just kind of floats him in the Nile amongst the reeds. He's not just, he's not going down the rapids. She just floats him, just kind of pushes out, boop, and it's just floating in, staying there amidst the reeds. Pharaoh's daughter comes down. Oh, what's crying in the little basket? It's a little cute little boy, and she wants to keep him. Hey, Dad, can I keep him? And what she does, she needs to find somebody who is lactating, who can take care of him. And so she, as she's looking at this baby, what am I going to do with this baby? Who approaches her? Moses' sister. Oh, you have a cute little baby. Do you need help raising that baby? Do you need somebody to help take care of the baby? Yes, I do. Let me go. I just happen to know somebody who can do that. It's her mom. It's Moses' mom. And then Moses' mom gets Moses back. Because when you give something you love to God, put it in his hands. And for all you know, you're going to get that back. And you're going to even get paid to do who you are. So, this is what's interesting. She gets paid then by Pharaoh's daughter to be Moses' mom. What a sweet deal. What a sweet deal. So, you just never know how things may turn out for you. So anyway, that's another story.
And she sees that he's wrapped in a Hebrew blanket, so she knows who.
Oh, she knows he's a little Hebrew boy, but he's just so cute.
Brown baby, can I have him?
Can I make a comment about the midwives?
Yeah.
I think about like the Jews and helping the Jews, and you'd have to lie to the Nazis. Well, the midwives were lying, saying that they would be born, and then God blessed them.
Yes.
So, to me that shows if you're trying to help and save someone, that maybe it's okay to lie.
Yeah, okay, so Jill's going, there's a time to lie, and it's okay to lie if you're saving somebody's life. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Would you tell the truth to a Nazi?
No.
No.
I hope not.
Or to a snowflake.
Or do a snow?
Yes.
I mean, it's like,
That's what makes them mad.
I mean, shrewd. Shrewd as serpents. That's what we're supposed to be. Right? Okay. So, Moses, by the way, remember what his name is. Moshe, it's to draw up, to draw out is his name. And that's what he's named because he was drawn up out of the water. I'm going to name you drawn out. And ironically, that's a prophetic name because that's what he's used for as he draws God's people out of Egypt. Verse 21, look at that. God sends Moses to live with a priest of all things to be God, to learn God's ways. You know, of course, that was running for his life because he had killed an Egyptian taskmaster for beating on a Jew. But he goes to live with he runs into the priest of Midian. Of course, he falls in love with the daughter there and all that. Who has God led you to prepare you for your assignment? Just think about it. God has led each of us to at least one person to prepare us for who we are now, or who we're going to be. All right. Verses 23 to 25, look at it, of chapter 2. God is aware of our suffering. Hey, Moses. I've heard the cries of my people. Chapter 3, look at that. Verse 3, God was fishing. God was fishing. His bait was a burning bush. It was a supernatural burning bush. Moses turned aside, it said. Question for yourself. Do you take time to explore the burning bushes? Do you pick up on them? God doesn't speak until you respond to the bait. That supernatural thing. God wasn't going to do anything for the Israelites until the minister was on holy ground. So he brings Moses right there, at that bush. And perhaps God is waiting to act in your life until you're on holy ground. You've got to get near him, get to the place where he speaks. So just a little thought for yourself. Look at that. I don't know if that speaks to you tonight. That may speak to you tonight. Verse 10 of chapter 3. God says, you're my man, Moses, to bring freedom for those in physical and spiritual bondage. Israel wasn't just in physical bondage, it was also in spiritual bondage. Why? Well, remember, we find out the stuff they started to instinctively do what they thought was worship at Mount Sinai because all they knew was what the Egyptians was teaching them. There was no passing down of this God that was leading, the patriarchs. I mean, sure, there's some oral traditions there, but they were caught up in this. And so that's when they later make their own golden calf. Verse 11, Moses' response, you got the wrong guy, God. Verse 14, God reveals himself by name to Moses, and by the name used in Genesis by Eve in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, by the way. That's where, Eve says that God has given me a son. She said Yahweh. Chapter 4. Verses 13 to 17, that's where God provides a partner for Moses. All right, Moses, if you're going to plan this much, okay, you can bring your brother along. I'll talk through him, but you still need to be there for what I need you to do. Verses 30 to chapter 5, verse 21. The Israelites, this is where they're overwhelmed by the good news. Only to find out that their situation gets worse as Pharaoh's underwhelmed by the news and they get angry at Moses. Because Moses goes, says, hey everybody, I talked to Pharaoh and God said, let him go. Told Pharaoh to let you go. Everybody thinks this is great, but then Pharaoh goes, Pharaoh makes the work only harder on the people. And the people then look at Moses and go, okay, you're not helping us here. You've only made things more difficult. Chapter 20, verse 22, this is where Moses goes, I want out of this assignment. And pretty much he says, by the way, you still haven't done what you promised. Because God's promises take longer than we think, don't they? Yeah, chapter 5, somebody read verse 22.
Moses turned again to the Lord and said, O Lord, why have you mistreated this people? Why did you ever send me?
Right? So you see what happens. Moses goes to Pharaoh, tells Pharaoh, God says, let his people go, or else. Pharaoh goes, oh yeah? And he puts more hard work on the Israelites. The Israelites then look to Moses, say, man, you've messed with our lives, with friends like you. And then Moses, then he goes to God, hey God, they're all mad at me. Why in the world did you send me? Because, boy, I wish you wouldn't have messed with my life. How often have you done that? Because you're reading things wrong and your timing is off. Because God's promises take longer than we think. Flip to chapter 7, verse 14. The plagues begin. This is where God now backs up Moses. Okay, buddy. I hear you. I know. I saw this coming. I knew they were going to complain. I knew Pharaoh would make it worse on them. I knew you'd then misunderstand that. You'd get mad at me. So here, I'm going to help you out. Ready? I'm sending some supernatural stuff on the peeps. And here it is. Verse 8. To bring Pharaoh to his knees before his creator. So back up just a hair. God launched an elaborate, gradually intensifying program of disciplinary disasters against Egypt. Did not? The first two plagues were connected with the waters of Egypt. Did you notice that? Especially the Nile, the river, was sacred to the Egyptians. And that was attacked by God. The Nile, that was like their source of life. Well, yeah, you're in Egypt, you need water. They practically worshipped the Nile. So God messes with the Nile. I love it. Okay? That's what he does. He's going to mess with the stuff you depend on to get your attention. The two plagues that he does are blood and frogs. So he turns the river, all the waterways, to blood. I want to remind you that the first and the last of the 10 plagues are about blood. Blood symbolizes life or death. You think that would have been shocking enough. Okay, 10th plague, of course, the death of the firstborn. Let me check my time. Oh.
What do you expect?
So, and then frogs are coming up out of, frogs, they're aquatic.
They're what?
Compared to toads.
Okay.
They're not. Toads are land frogs. Frogs like the water. They live in the water. So frogs are all over the Nile, and they're coming up out of the Nile, and they're doing it in such a way that I think I've said before, it's reminiscent of creation itself. As if God goes, let there be frogs. And then the frogs. That's what he said. He turns the water to blood. Boom. He turns water into wine, he can turn it into blood. He goes, I want frogs. Bah! And up come bajillions of frogs. All over the place. Or crickets, like in the mansion. There are crickets. It's amazing, the plague of crickets here. We did something wrong somewhere. Now, these were nuisance plagues. And while they were disgusting, while they were annoying, neither of them resulted in material loss or in severe human affliction, right? Yeah, it didn't kill anybody, but it sure was a pain. Both were announced in advance by Moses. Both were imitated then by Pharaoh's magicians. Oh yeah, we could turn water into blood. Now, I don't want to go here too long, but either they were good at faking stuff, or they truly had demonic assistance. Now, the demons cannot create. As far as we get from Scripture, they don't create, but they can sure create illusions. You think of a psychic, or somebody who channels somebody, even, speaks almost with that same voice of the dearly departed. That's demonic. Okay, they're good at faking, mimicking. The first plague, the blood, made no impact at all to Pharaoh. The second forces him to ask Moses to intercede for him. Okay, these frogs are bugging me now. So Moses, would you please tell your God, okay, just get rid of the frogs. I'm ready to talk. Chapter 8, there's the second pair of plagues. Go ahead and look at it. God uses tiny, perhaps blood-sucking insects to make life miserable for the Egyptians. The first of the plagues was unannounced. It just appears. And that's as if to punish Pharaoh for revoking his commitment to releasing the Israelites. Because he goes, okay, tell your God, get rid of the frogs, I'll let your people go. He doesn't. Then I changed my mind. Moses doesn't come and say, all right, well, since you did that, flies are coming. Gnats were coming. And he doesn't. Did you show up? At the conclusion of this pair of plagues, the arrogant Egyptian king explores the possibility of compromise with Moses. Chapter 9, as the contest escalated, God sent upon Egypt the 5th and 6th plagues of sickness and boils. So from the first of these, the livestock throughout Egypt died. All the livestock died. Remember the Atlas storm? What percentage of the livestock did we lose?
Relatively small. It was a bad number, but...
It was a bad number, but compared to all they could have died. But imagine if everything died.
Everything but the Hebrew cattle.
Everything but the Hebrew cattle. The second affliction falls upon humans as well as the beasts, and from both plagues the land of Goshen was exempt. That's where the Hebrews lived, in the land of Goshen. Not the Atlantic Ocean, the land of Goshen. Chapters 9 and 10, that's the 7th and 8th plagues, where God destroys the crops of Egypt by means of hail and locusts. So, man, I'm hitting your food sources really hard, right? Chapter 10, there's no specific prediction accompanying the 9th plague of darkness. Moses' gesture towards the sky, he just does this thing, and it brings about this darkness, and it can be felt in the land. And the plague seems to be designed to be like a harbinger of the 10th and the final plague that's coming. And the light of the sun is blotted out completely. It says that for 3 days the Egyptians dared not leave for the safety of their dwelling. It is that pitch black. Can't even see your hand in front of your face kind of thing. Yet in the land of Goshen, there's light. Let's talk about the plagues. They were miraculous. Of course, an intensification marks the plagues that represent a natural phenomenon like frogs, flies,
Rain.
Is that a typo?
Yeah, boils. I forgot the meaning of the word. Hail, locust, darkness. Disasters like that, had never been seen before in Egypt, of course not. And the immediacy of the plagues points to it being a divine miracle. Because it happens right away. Again, reminiscent of creation. God just wants it to happen. Boom. I'm going to turn off the lights. Boom. Lights are turned on. The plague conditions developed immediately, just after a word from Moses, after literally a gesture. Taps that staff into the lake. Boom. Everything goes red. So clearly this is God. You're supposed to understand it wasn't like some runoff upstream where the dirt was really red started to come slowly, and then the river started to look red like blood. No, they turned red because it literally became blood. The plagues were carefully controlled. Wasn't Mother Nature on the rampage? God's servant, Moses, could call forth a plague or make one cease at will. Number 4, the element of prediction also makes the plagues miracles. Hey, this is coming, and then it comes. They came, and they ceased, exactly as Moses predicted. In one case, Pharaoh was allowed to name the time of the removal of the plague. Well, when do you want it to end? You say when.
The funniest part about that story is he doesn't say now, he says tomorrow. That's okay. We'll keep the frogs overnight.
Yeah, we'll keep. To keep my feet warm in the bed. 5, beginning with the 4th plague, a discrimination between Israel and Egypt is in the administration of the plagues is evident. Explanations of that fact on naturalistic grounds are strained. You know what I'm saying? The plagues reveal a certain progressiveness, again, an escalation of suffering, personal loss by the Egyptians. There's a progression in the demonstration of power of God. A little more powerful. Wow, look what I can do. I can even turn off the light of the sun. Bam! The Egyptians are scared. Pharaoh's heart just gets harder and harder. The reaction of the Egyptians indicates that the plagues were more than just natural disasters. Again, at the end of the 3rd plague, the magicians commented, this is the finger of God. They just go, we can't touch this. When the 8th plague was threatened, the closest advisors of Pharaoh, they pleaded with him to release the Israelites because Egypt was ruined. They go, buddy, get off your ego trip. We're all suffering because of you. Okay? Stop fighting this God. And then 8, the source of some of the plagues, the source points to a miracle. Water turned to blood, dust to lice, ashes into boils. They're not natural phenomenon. Again, it's like creation. It's 8 o'clock. And I've got that to do next week. Okay. The purpose of the plagues is really cool. It's really cool. You'll like it. They had a frog-headed god that they worshipped. They tested him, but he was this is so cool. I don't want to go there now. Okay. Any thoughts? Comments? Before we close?